Some truths don't stay buried, not even beneath 10 winters of snow. For 10 years, Clara Whitmore believed her husband died chasing justice in the mountains of Montana. But one morning, while clearing the attic, she found a box of letters written in his hand, dated a week after his death. Each letter spoke of a hidden cabin on the northern ridge, a place meant to protect her when the truth finally comes. So she followed his words into the blizzard, guided only by their old shepherd dog and a faith she thought she'd lost. When she reached the cliffs, she found the cabin exactly as described. Warm fire, coffee on the table, her own blanket folded neatly on the chair. But her husband was supposed to be dead, so who lit the fire waiting for her? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe miracles still find their way through the snow, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because tomorrow I have another story that will touch your heart. The blizzard had not stopped for 3 days, turning Hollow Ridge, Montana, into a white ocean of silence. Snow pressed against windows like a patient ghost, muffling every sound except the faint crackle of the stove inside the old Whitmore farmhouse. Clara Whitmore moved slowly through the narrow hallway, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in her hand. At 40, she carried herself with quiet strength, tall, with narrow shoulders, dark chestnut hair streaked with silver, and skin pale as the frost outside. There was something both gentle and unyielding about her face, the kind of beauty time had not softened but sculpted into melancholy. 10 winters had passed since her husband, Ethan Whitmore, the former sheriff of Hollow Ridge, vanished into the canyons. The town had called it an accident, a fall while investigating a smuggling route through the mountains, but the story had always felt incomplete. People whispered that Ethan had uncovered something he shouldn't have, that his fall was no accident. Clara never answered those whispers. She'd buried her grief under routine, tending the chickens, mending the fence, feeding the fire, surviving one day at a time. Her only companion now was Rex, Ethan's old German shepherd. Once a powerful working dog with the sheriff's unit, he was now gray around the muzzle, but his amber eyes still burned with alert intelligence. At 12 years old, Rex moved slower, but he shadowed Clara everywhere, as though guarding her from an invisible threat only he could sense. That morning, Clara had decided to clean the attic, a task she'd avoided for years. Dust lay thick on the beams, the air smelled of cedar and forgotten winters. She moved old trunks aside, her breath rising in small white clouds. The house creaked under the weight of wind and memory. She worked in silence until her gloved fingers brushed against a board that felt loose beneath the carpet of dust. She frowned, pried it up carefully, and froze. Beneath the floorboards was a small wooden box, wrapped in waxed paper to keep out the damp. Her heartbeat quickened. The box was smooth, crafted by hand. She recognized the joinery. Ethan had built this kind of box years ago for storing ammunition and letters. With trembling hands, she peeled away the waxed layer and lifted the lid. Inside were 20 envelopes, neatly bound with twine, their edges yellowed, but the handwriting unmistakable. Ethan's bold, slanted script. Beneath them, folded carefully, was a map drawn in ink, its lines fading but still legible. For a long moment she could only stare. 10 years of grief cracked open in her chest. The first envelope was dated 18 months before his death, the second, 1 week after. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first letter. If you're reading this, Clara, it means I failed to tell you everything. Forgive me. There are things I buried in those mountains that I can no longer protect. You need to know what really happened in Silvervale. Her breath caught. Silvervale, the mining town north of Hollow Ridge, now abandoned. Ethan had spent months there before his accident, claiming it was routine investigation. The next line of the letter was even stranger. There's a cabin on the northern ridge. I built it for you. When the truth comes due, it will keep you safe. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth. The handwriting was so vivid, she could almost hear his voice again, low, calm, with that faint western rasp that had once steadied her in every storm. Her eyes burned, but she kept reading. Each letter was a fragment, warnings, confessions, half-truths. Ethan wrote of being watched, of men who would rather bury the law than answer to it. He described carrying supplies into the mountains, building the cabin plank by plank, hiding something there that would redeem the past or destroy everything. He never said what it was. The last letter ended abruptly. If anything happens to me, follow Rex. He'll know the way. A chill, deeper than the cold, outside swept through her. Rex, lying by the attic door, raised his head as if hearing his name from another time. His ears flicked toward her, and for an instant Clara felt a strange certainty that the dog understood. She looked down at the map spread across her knees. The route was hand-drawn, winding through the northern pass toward Raven's Bluff, a sheer cliff where storms gathered like sentinels. Her rational mind rebelled. The map could be years old, the letters nothing but Ethan's old fears spilled onto paper. Yet a quiet, stubborn voice inside whispered otherwise. Below the map, tucked between two letters, was something else, a small brass key with the initials EW engraved on it. She turned it over in her hand, remembering how Ethan used to carry a similar one on his belt for his gun cabinet. But this key was different, heavier, older. The moment she touched it, something inside her stirred. Dread, yes, but also hope. She sat in the attic for hours, snowlight flickering through the small window, surrounded by the scent of pine dust and ghosted ink. Her mind spiraled. Why had he kept this from her? What secret could be worth abandoning her for a decade? And how could a letter dated after his death exist at all? When evening fell, Clara descended the stairs, the box held close to her chest. The stove hissed in the parlor, throwing orange light across the worn floorboards. She poured herself another cup of coffee, but didn't drink it. Rex rested his head on her knee, watching her with patient eyes. "I think your master's calling us," she whispered, tracing the edges of the map. "What do you say, old boy? One more walk into the snow?" Rex gave a soft whine, half affirmation, half warning. The storm outside howled harder, rattling the shutters like a beast eager to come in. Clara rose, packed the letters back into their box, and set it by the door beside her winter coat. Tomorrow she would go to town. Tell old Jacob Rowe she planned to head north for a few days. Maybe he would understand. She would take Rex, follow the map, and find that cabin. Whether she found her husband's secret or his ghost no longer mattered, but as she turned to leave the room, something made her pause. The lamp flickered, just once, though there was no draft, and for the briefest heartbeat, she thought she saw a shadow move past the window, tall and familiar, vanishing into the whirling snow. By morning, the storm had dulled into a quiet snowfall. The world outside Clara's window shimmered in soft white, every fence post and pine bough heavy with fresh frost. She packed her knapsack carefully, matches, a lantern, a small revolver that once belonged to Ethan, and the wooden box of letters. Rex stood by the door, tail flicking impatiently, his breath forming brief clouds of mist. He seemed younger today, energized by a purpose he alone fully grasped. Hollow Ridge slept under the snow, its handful of shops still shuttered. Clara led Rex through the narrow main street, stopping by the general store where Jacob Rowe was stacking crates near the porch. Jacob was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, his beard long and streaked with white, eyes the pale blue of winter skies. Years of logging had bent his back slightly, but there was a quiet endurance in the way he moved, a man tempered by loss and cold seasons. His wife had died of pneumonia 15 years before, and since then Jacob had kept mostly to himself, known for his blunt honesty and deep loyalty to Ethan. When Clara told him she planned to follow the map north, Jacob set down his crates and studied her with concern. "Those ridges aren't kind this time of year," he said, his voice low, steady as an old saw. "Even men with rifles and snow gear don't last long up there." "I'm not going to climb," Clara said, though her tone betrayed her uncertainty. "Just to see what he left behind. Maybe it'll give me peace." Jacob scratched at his beard. "Peace don't live in those mountains, Clara. Only ghosts and secrets." Then, after a pause, he added, "Ethan was a good man, but good men sometimes do foolish things to protect the people they love. If you're set on going, take this." He handed her a small hunting knife with an engraved handle, initials JR burned faintly into the wood. "For the road," he said simply. She thanked him, feeling a pang of emotion she couldn't quite name. Jacob watched her disappear down the street, his expression unreadable, as if part of him wanted to follow but knew better than to stir old wounds. The road north wound through pine forests heavy with snow. Rex trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure she followed. The air was sharp, filled with the faint metallic scent of frost and resin. Clara walked for hours, the cold biting into her boots, her thoughts flickering like the gray light filtering through the trees. Each step forward felt like stepping deeper into Ethan's shadow, a man she loved, but perhaps never fully knew. Near midday, she reached an old ranger station, half buried in snow. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. Rex barked once, alert. Cautiously, Clara approached and knocked. After a moment, the door creaked open to reveal Sarah Denning, a woman in her late 30s with copper hair tucked into a wool cap and a rifle slung over one shoulder. Her face was freckled and windburned, her green eyes sharp with curiosity. "Morning," Sarah said, her tone wary but not unkind. "You're far from town, ma'am. Roads aren't safe past the timberline." "I'm looking for the Northern Ridge," Clara explained. "My husband built a cabin there years ago." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "Your husband wouldn't be Ethan Whitmore, would he?" Clara's heart skipped. "You knew him?" Sarah leaned the rifle against the wall. "Everyone up here knew Ethan. Sheriff once pulled me out of a snowdrift when I was 16. He saved my brother, too, back when Beckett's men were raiding the mining camps. Hard man, but fair. Didn't deserve the end he got." Her voice softened as though recalling something personal. "You favor him in the eyes." Clara managed a faint smile. "He used to say I had the patience of a saint." Sarah snorted lightly. "Saints don't go trekking through blizzards with old dogs. You've got something else. Grit." They shared a quick meal by the fire, canned beans and bitter coffee, before Sarah drew a rough map on parchment. "If you're going to Raven's Bluff, follow the frozen river till you see the cliffs. There's an old bridge, half gone now. Cross it before sundown, or you'll lose the light." Before leaving, Clara asked, "Why do you stay out here alone?" Sarah hesitated. "Used to have someone," she said finally. "A partner. He went missing last spring near Silvervale. Never found a trace." The words hung heavy in the air. "Maybe I'm just waiting for an answer, same as you." Outside, the wind had picked up again. Clara thanked her and continued north, her breath sharp against the growing cold. Rex walked close to her leg now, tail stiff, ears twitching. The forest had changed. Quieter, denser, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The path narrowed, twisting between frozen streams and jagged rocks. Once, she thought she heard footsteps behind her, but when she turned, there was only snow swirling through empty air. By late afternoon, the clouds thickened, painting the sky in bruised shades of gray. Clara found the broken bridge Sarah had mentioned, a skeletal span of timber crossing a deep ravine. The planks creaked under her weight, ice cracking like bones. Halfway across, Rex growled low in his throat. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Across the gorge, on the opposite bank, a figure stood among the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat, too far to see the face. The stranger watched her silently, unmoving. Clara froze. The world seemed to narrow to the space between them, the sound of wind howling through the gorge. Then, as she blinked against the snow, the figure turned and vanished into the forest. Heart pounding, she crossed the rest of the bridge and hurried along the ridge trail. The sun was bleeding into dusk now, and shadows stretched long over the snow. The cabin couldn't be far. She could almost feel Ethan's presence with every step, like a whisper at her back. When she reached a small clearing, she stopped short. There, half buried in snow, was a set of footprints, fresh, large, and leading up the trail toward Raven's Bluff. Not animal. Human. Rex sniffed the tracks, then looked up at her, ears pricked, tail stiff. Clara felt her pulse thundering. Someone else was headed to the same place, or had been there already. As the last light faded, she caught sight of smoke rising faintly between the trees ahead, curling into the gray sky. It was too thin to be natural. Someone was burning wood, recently. She knelt beside Rex, her breath clouding the air. "Easy, boy," she murmured, her voice trembling not from the cold but from something deeper, a mix of dread and hope. "We're not alone out here." And for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't sure if that was a comfort or a warning. The snow deepened as dusk folded into night, muffling every sound but the crunch of Clara's boots and the steady rhythm of Rex's paws beside her. The faint column of smoke rising ahead was both a promise and a threat. The forest pressed close around them, branches heavy with frost, bending low like silent witnesses. Somewhere in the distance, a raven cried once, its voice carrying through the icy stillness. By the time Clara reached the ridge, darkness had swallowed the path. Her lantern threw a thin halo across the snow, glinting off ice-crusted rocks. The cabin appeared suddenly from behind a thicket of spruce, small, weathered, and improbably alive. Smoke coiled gently from the chimney, orange light flickered behind frost-coated windows, and footprints, large, boot-shaped, led up to the door. Clara's breath hitched. The place looked exactly as Ethan had described in his letters. She knelt, brushing the snow from the threshold. The wood was old but clean, recently swept. Someone had been here, not long ago. Rex sniffed the air, tail low, body tense. Clara rested her hand on his head. "Stay close," she whispered, though her voice trembled. The door wasn't locked. She pushed it open, and the hinges gave a soft groan like a sigh of recognition. Inside, the cabin was dim but warm. The fire burned low in the hearth, and the air smelled faintly of pine resin and coffee. A wool blanket, her own work, the one she'd woven 10 years ago, hung neatly over the back of a chair. On the small wooden table lay a half-empty mug, steam still curling upward. Clara's heart pounded. Someone had been here only minutes ago. "Hello?" she called softly. The word vanished into the crackle of the fire. No answer. She took a slow step forward, scanning the small room. The worn desk against the wall, shelves lined with canned food, a rifle leaning in the corner. Her lantern light fell on a journal, lying open on the table. The handwriting, strong, deliberate, made her knees weaken. It was Ethan's. Her fingers hovered over the page, afraid to touch. The ink was still wet in places, smeared as though the writer had been interrupted. She read the first few lines aloud, her voice barely a whisper. Day 344, snow heavier than expected, tracks near the bluff. Not animals, someone's following. If she ever finds this place, I hope she understands why I did it. Her throat tightened. "Ethan!" Rex barked sharply, spinning toward the door. A shadow moved across the window, tall, deliberate. Clara's pulse surged. She grabbed the revolver from her belt and stood perfectly still, listening. The wind pressed against the walls and then 3 soft knocks. She aimed the gun toward the door. "Who's there?" No response. Only the sigh of wind through the trees. Then the door creaked open an inch, and a man's voice, low and weary, drifted through. "Easy now, Mrs. Whitmore. I ain't here to hurt. You!" The lantern light revealed a figure stepping inside. Tobias Quinn, once Ethan's closest friend and deputy. He looked older now, mid-50s perhaps, with a heavy coat dusted in snow, gray stubble covering his square jaw, and eyes like chipped stone. His left hand bore a faint scar, an old bullet wound Clara remembered from years ago. "Tobias?" she breathed. He nodded slowly, closing the door behind him. "You shouldn't have come up here alone." His voice carried the same authority it always had, the tone of a man used to command, though softened now by guilt. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, gun still trembling in her grip. "I could ask you the same." He unbuttoned his coat and held out his hands, palms open. "I followed the tracks, yours and his. You weren't the only one to find that map." She lowered the gun slightly but didn't holster it. "You know about the letters." "I helped him write some of them," Tobias admitted, the words rough with shame. "Ethan knew the walls were closing in. After Silvervale went south, Beckett wanted him dead, wanted us both gone. I told him to disappear, to fake it. We switched a body, one of Beckett's hired guns. The doc made it official." Clara's stomach turned. "You made me bury another man." "It was the only way to keep you safe," Tobias said. He thought they'd stop looking if they believed he was gone. But he kept digging. Too stubborn to quit, too righteous to hide. Clara clenched her jaw. "Where is he, Tobias? Where's Ethan now?" Tobias hesitated. "He was here 2 nights ago. He'd found something, proof of Beckett's dealings with the Silvervale mines. He planned to bring it to the marshals in Denver, but someone got wind of it. When I came back this morning, he was gone." Rex growled low again, eyes fixed on the corner near the back door. Tobias moved closer, lifting the lantern. There, half hidden under a rug, was a dark smear on the floorboards. Blood. Dried, but fresh enough to glisten. Clara's breath caught. No. Not his, maybe, Tobias said quickly. Could be one of Beckett's men. There was a struggle, broken glass by the back window. He might have escaped. She turned toward the open journal again, noticing something she'd missed before, a small leather pouch tucked beneath it. Inside were a few folded documents and a photograph. Ethan, standing beside a woman in a ranger's uniform, both smiling stiffly at the camera. Clara's pulse quickened. Who is she? Tobias sighed. That's Marshal Elise Grant, federal investigator. She's the only one who believed Ethan about Beckett. They worked together. Quiet, off the record. He hesitated, searching her eyes. He trusted her, Clara. Don't let your mind twist that into something else. But Clara had already turned away, gripping the photo tightly, her thoughts spiraling. Years alone, and her husband had been out here, building cabins, writing letters, working with another woman. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Tobias set his hat down. Listen, if he's alive, we've got one chance to reach him before Beckett's men do. He left a message scratched on the back wall. You should see it. He guided her toward the rear of the cabin, where the lamplight revealed faint words etched into the wood. The river remembers. Follow it at dawn. Clara traced the letters with her glove. The river probably means the North Fork, Tobias said. Runs straight through the canyon. We can start there in the morning. But Clara barely heard him. Her eyes lingered on the fire, on the photo in her hand, on the key she still carried in her pocket. Ethan's initials gleaming faintly in the light. Hope and fear tangled inside her until she couldn't tell them apart. Outside, the wind howled again, and for an instant she thought she heard footsteps crunching through snow, moving slowly around the cabin, circling. Tobias looked up sharply. You hear that? Rex barked once, deep in warning. Clara blew out the lantern. The cabin fell into silence, save for the sound of snow shifting on the roof. Somewhere out there, beyond the window's edge, a shadow moved again, watching. The night outside the cabin had turned black as coal, the wind clawing against the windows with restless fingers. Clara crouched near the fireplace, revolver tight in her grip, her breath shallow. Rex stood rigid beside her, fur bristling, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Tobias moved silently to the window, his heavy frame lit only by the trembling glow of the dying fire. He eased the curtain aside just enough to peer into the snowstorm. Nothing but darkness and movement. A flicker between trees, shadows shifting where no man should stand. Someone's out there, Tobias whispered. His voice, though calm, carried an edge of steel. He had seen this kind of danger before. Ambushes in the woods, men hunting men. Years ago, during the Silvervale raids, he had led the sheriff's men into the mines to stop Beckett's smugglers. Half his unit never made it back. That memory had left its mark, a hardness in his eyes, and a tremor that surfaced only when ghosts came walking through the snow. Clara tried to steady her breathing. Could it be Ethan? She asked, voice trembling between hope and fear. Tobias shook his head. If it were him, Rex wouldn't be growling like that. The words hung heavy in the cabin's silence, then a sound, faint but distinct, the soft crunch of boots circling the house. Tobias gestured for Clara to douse the fire. She threw a blanket over the hearth, plunging the cabin into darkness. Only the faint moonlight through the window remained, silvering the frost on the glass. Stay down, Tobias murmured, sliding his rifle from the corner. If they want to come in, let them make the first mistake. Minutes crawled by, stretched thin by fear, then 3 sharp knocks at the back door. Measured, deliberate. Tobias signaled for Clara to stay where she was and crept toward the sound. He flung the door open, rifle raised, no one, just snow blowing in on the wind. But as he stepped outside, something caught his eye, a glint on the porch rail, a silver badge half buried in frost. He picked it up and froze. The engraving read, U.S. Marshal Elise Grant. Tobias's jaw clenched. She's here, he muttered, half to himself. Behind him, Clara appeared in the doorway, clutching the lantern. Who? Before he could answer, a voice rang out from the trees, firm. Female, edged with exhaustion. Don't shoot, it's me! A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman in a dark parka, snow clinging to her sleeves, a rifle slung over her shoulder. Her stride was steady but weary, like someone who had been traveling for days without rest. When she stepped into the light, Clara saw a face both sharp and kind. Elise Grant, late 30s, her hazel eyes alert even in fatigue. A thin scar curved along her cheekbone, the kind earned from years of being too close to danger. Tobias lowered his weapon, relief and suspicion mingling. "You're a long way from Denver. Marshal." Elise gave a small nod. "I followed the trail from Silvervale, found signs of struggle by the river. Blood, footprints, 2 sets. One of them was Ethan's." Clara's heart stuttered. "He's alive?" Elise's gaze softened. "I believe so, but he's hurt. Beckett's men are closing in, and they know about this cabin." Tobias cursed under his breath. "So we're sitting ducks." Elise entered and shut the door against the wind. "You have maybe an hour before they get here. There's a back route through the canyon if we move fast. Ethan marked it on the river map. He wanted you out before dawn." Clara's eyes widened. "He knew I'd come?" Elise hesitated, then met her gaze. "He hoped you wouldn't, but he prepared for it all the same." They gathered supplies quickly. Blankets, ammunition, food. Rex barked once, pacing near the window as if urging them to hurry. Clara strapped on her coat, her hands shaking. Tobias packed his rifle, his movements efficient despite the weight of age and guilt. Elise checked her revolver, the click of metal sharp in the tense air. Before leaving, Clara glanced once more at the table, where Ethan's journal still lay open. She slipped it into her coat pocket. "If he's alive, I'm not leaving without him." They stepped into the storm. Snow whipped across their faces, erasing footprints almost instantly. The moon hung pale and distant above the ridge. Elise led the way, her lantern shielded beneath her coat. Tobias followed close, scanning the trees with the reflex of an old soldier. Clara trudged behind them, Rex glued to her side, his body warm against her leg. They followed the frozen river downstream until the forest thinned into jagged cliffs. The sound of rushing water echoed faintly beneath the ice. Elise stopped, pointing ahead. "That's the old mining trail. Ethan and I used it last spring when we raided Beckett's storage camp. If they're tracking us, that's where they'll strike." Tobias grunted. "Then we'll give them a fight they won't forget." But before they could move, Rex barked sharply. Once, twice. His fur bristled, teeth bared. From the darkness came the metallic click of a rifle bolt. A voice shouted, "Drop your weapons!" 3 men stepped from the tree line, faces obscured by scarves, rifles glinting in the moonlight. The one in front wore a black duster coat and spoke with the slow arrogance of someone used to being obeyed. "Well, well," he drawled. "Sheriff's widow, the old deputy, and the marshal. Looks like Beckett's ghosts came crawling back." Tobias raised his rifle halfway. "You boys should have stayed buried." Gunfire shattered the stillness. Snow exploded around them. Elise dove behind a fallen log, firing back with practiced precision. Tobias took cover by a rock, gritting his teeth. Clara pulled Rex behind her and pressed herself flat against the icy ground, heart pounding like thunder. The shootout raged for what felt like forever, the forest erupting in flashes of light and echoing cracks. Then, silence. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the men lay still in the snow. The third had vanished. Elise scanned the tree line. "He's running," she said. Tobias spat into the snow. "Then let him run. Beckett will know we're coming now." They regrouped, breath steaming in the freezing air. Clara stared at the bodies, bile rising in her throat. She had never seen death up close like this, not since Ethan's funeral. "Is this what he's been living through?" she whispered. Elise placed a gloved hand on her shoulder. "It's what he's been surviving through." The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the faint echo of something else, a cry, distant and weak, carried by the snow. Rex lifted his head and barked toward the sound. Tobias frowned. "You hear that?" Elise nodded. "That came from upriver." Clara's heart leapt. "Ethan?" Without waiting for an answer, she started running toward the sound, her boots crunching through the snow, the others close behind. The river glimmered faintly under the moonlight, a frozen vein leading deeper into the wild. And there, half shrouded by ice mist, a flicker of movement, a figure stumbling near the bank before collapsing into the snow. "Elise!" Clara shouted, breaking into a sprint. "Someone's there!" But before they reached him, another shot rang out from the trees, sharp and clean. The figure fell still. Rex barked wildly, charging ahead as Clara screamed into the blizzard, "Ethan!" And then, only silence. The echo of that gunshot seemed to hang in the frozen air forever. Clara stumbled forward, heart hammering, snow biting her cheeks as she fell to her knees beside the still figure half buried by the riverbank. Rex whined softly, pressing his nose against the man's shoulder. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, until a weak gasp cut through the silence. "Ethan," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. She tore off her gloves and turned him over. His face was pale beneath a crust of ice, a cut running down his temple, but his eyes, blue-gray, steady even through pain, were unmistakable. 10 years had not erased them. "Clara?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving, like a prayer whispered into the wind. "I'm here," she said, cradling his head in her arms. "You're safe now." Elise and Tobias caught up seconds later, weapons raised, scanning the tree line. Tobias fired a warning shot toward the woods. The faint sound of retreating footsteps answered. Whoever had fired the bullet had fled. Elise knelt beside them, her expression tightening as she checked Ethan's pulse. "He's losing blood," she muttered. "We have to move. There's a ranger outpost downriver, half a mile." Clara nodded, but her gaze never left Ethan's face. 10 years of grief, anger, and unanswered questions condensed into that fragile, trembling moment. She brushed a lock of frozen hair from his brow. "You lied to me," she whispered, not in accusation, but in sorrow. Ethan managed a faint, broken smile. "I had to. They would have killed you." "I thought they already had," she said softly. Rex whined again, licking Ethan's hand, tail wagging weakly in the snow. Ethan chuckled under his breath, voice barely audible. "Good boy. You remembered." Tobias lifted him carefully with Elise's help. They built a makeshift sled from a fallen branch and rope, and together they dragged him along the frozen riverbank. The snow fell lighter now, like ash settling after a long fire. Above them, dawn began to bleed into the horizon, faint pink light painting the canyon walls. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring names: Beckett, Silvervale, Ledgers. Clara held his hand, whispering reassurance, her own fingers numb. "Don't you dare leave me again," she said. "Not after all this." When they reached the ranger outpost, Elise kicked the door open. Inside was a single-room shelter stocked with old supplies and a rusted stove. They laid Ethan on the cot while Elise tended his wound with alcohol and torn fabric. Tobias took guard at the door, rifle ready, eyes fixed on the woods. "He'll live," Elise said finally, bandaging the wound. "The bullet grazed his shoulder. Whoever shot him wanted him silenced, not dead." Clara sank beside the cot, exhaustion flooding through her. "He can't keep running," she said. "None of us can." Ethan's eyes fluttered open again, faint but clear. "It's over, Clara," he rasped. "The proof's in my pack. The ledger, Beckett's payments, names of the miners he buried. I just needed to get it to Elise." Elise held up a weathered leather pouch, stained with blood but intact. "You did," she said quietly. "This will bring him down." Tobias gave a grim nod. "Then let's make sure it counts." The next hours blurred. Elise used her radio to call for extraction. A federal snowcat would reach them by nightfall. Tobias went outside to bury the bodies left from the skirmish, muttering prayers into the wind. Rex stayed by Ethan's side the entire time, head resting on his chest, as if guarding his master's heartbeat. When the storm finally broke, the world beyond the windows glowed with the soft blue of twilight. Clara stepped outside for air, staring at the endless white expanse of the valley below. Snow fell gently now, harmless, peaceful. Ethan joined her slowly, arm in a sling, wrapped in a wool blanket. He looked older, not just in years but in weight carried too long. The lines on his face told stories of guilt and endurance, of a man who had lived too long in silence. "You shouldn't be standing," she said, half smiling through tears. "I've been lying down for 10 years, he replied, his voice hoarse but warm. "Thought I'd try something different." They stood side by side, watching the horizon. Below them, the frozen river wound through the canyon, glittering faintly under the setting sun. "Do you remember what you carved on the wall of the cabin?" Clara asked softly. Ethan nodded. The river remembers. What does it mean? He looked at her then, eyes soft. That no matter how much snow falls, no truth stays buried forever. It finds its way back, like water under ice. I thought if I built enough distance between us, maybe the river would forget me too. But it didn't, and neither did you. Clara's eyes filled again, but this time they carried warmth instead of grief. I tried, she whispered. Every winter, I tried. He reached for her hand. Then maybe it's time to stop trying and just remember. For a long while they said nothing. The storm had quieted, the sky bleeding into gold. Behind them, Elise emerged, holding the ledger. Marshals are on their way, she said. Beckett won't see another sunrise as a free man. Ethan exhaled, the burden finally slipping from his shoulders. Then it's done. Tobias came out last, leaning on his rifle, eyes tired but at peace. You two should head home. I'll stay until the marshals come. Clara looked at the cabin's distant silhouette against the white horizon, the place where it had all begun. Home, she repeated quietly, the word tasting new again. As they turned to leave, Rex bounded ahead, tail wagging, his paws kicking up small flurries of snow. Clara smiled through tears. Ethan laughed softly beside her, the tolkotoa. Sounds strange after so many years of silence. And as they walked down toward the valley, hand in hand, the morning sun broke through the clouds, lighting the frozen river in molten gold. Because some stories don't end where loss begins. They end where forgiveness finally finds its way home. Sometimes, God doesn't speak through thunder or miracles that split the sky. He whispers through snowstorms, through a loyal dog who never forgets, through the letter that survives a decade in silence. He reminds us that even when we think everything is lost, love, truth, hope, His grace is still at work, quietly stitching the broken pieces together. Ethan and Clara's story is not just about a husband found or a secret revealed. It's about how faith carries us through the winters of our lives, when the nights are cold, the road is lonely, and we think no one is listening. But He is. Always. Because miracles are not always bright or loud. Sometimes they come in the form of forgiveness, second chances, and hearts that still choose to love after being shattered. So if you're watching this tonight, maybe this story found you for a reason. Maybe you too need to believe that God still remembers your name, your pain, and your purpose. May His light guide you through every storm, and may His mercy bring warmth to your coldest days.